It seems as though every time you turn around these days, someone high profile is doing or saying something crazy in public and then apologizing for it and heading straight off to rehab. But are these apologies for real, or are they just a PR stunt? And does rehab really help? We're asking those questions today to Leandra Tomescu. She's a leading communication and public speaking expert. She's going to tell us what's really going on. Pleasure to have you here today, Leandra.
Thank you so much.
So I noticed on your website you said that the summer of 2006 was the summer of the apology.
It was indeed. It was.
But I think it's continuing. It's not just continuing on.
It is the year of the apology, and
right.
And the thing is, and it's really unfortunate for movie stars and politicians who used to be protected by PR people and tacit agreements with the media. We now have things like YouTube and Google Video and the internet, and so you make a mistake and everybody knows about it.
Right,
so it's not that there are so many more people that are messing up. It's just that we now know about it.
So you don't think that it's becoming more common? Because it seems to me every time I pick up the newspaper, you're hearing about it, but you just think that it's getting more. People are catching it. Well, maybe it's those damn cell phone cameras, you know? They're catching things that people never
tell me about it. That's exactly
know.
what happened with Michael Richards. That never would have gone beyond the circle of the Laugh Factory if it hadn't been for someone with a cell phone and then for YouTube. No, people have been putting their foot in their mouths for literally centuries.
Sure.
One of the biggest areas of rhetoric, kind of the fancy word for public speaking, is something called apologia. And Aristotle and Cicero and Demosthenes, thousands and thousands of years ago, had to tackle the issue of how do you get your foot out of your mouth once you've really screwed up? So no,
I think
it's
it'd be
not new.
great if some of our politicians today actually read Aristotle or the Greeks.
Wouldn't it be amazing?
I think a very small percentage. Go back to the founders of this country, and they all did, who were amazing. But I don't think these days anybody has. But my concern is, it's not that. I think if you make a mistake or screw up or do something wrong, you should apologize. I don't have a problem with apologies. My problem, and the reason I was talking to friends about this, and this is kind of what got me interested in this topic and wanted to do a show on it, is that it seems very canned, or it's too mechanical or too easy these days. You use the N-word, you call somebody a this, you call somebody a that. Well, you know that, somebody, the PR person, the attorney called him and said, you better get out there and issue an apology. You go on the Tonight Show and say how sorry you were. You go into rehab. Is any of it real? Is this complete image handling we're seeing here? Do you believe any of it? Are these people sincere? Are they changing, or is it just covering their ass and not getting sued or fired?
Right. It's so difficult for me to look in their soul and decide, whether or not these people really have changed. And so much of my work really is not knowing whether or not they've changed, but whether or not what they are doing is going to convince the American people that they are changing. However, there's some examples where it's extremely obvious. Michael Richards, for example, in his appearance on the David Letterman show, where he appeared via satellite. There was a quote in Gone with the Wind where Rhett Butler says to Scarlett O'Hara that you're like the thief who isn't sorry he stole, but he's awfully sorry he got caught. And that's exactly what I saw in Michael Richards. He was petrified, not so much because he thought, oh, I really am a racist and I never knew it, but because he saw his career going down the drain. So to me it was obvious, and it was extremely formulaic there. There's no doubt about it.
People have gotten very savvy about kind of the downside, or the pros and the cons of, what happens if you apologize or don't. In other words, I think there are, maybe people like you and other people, who are good image handlers who know how to, say, spin it or deal with the mess, the disaster that their client creates. But I just think it's unfortunate that okay, I have to admit, I'm a little bit of a cynic. I have a reporter's background. What can I say?
Oh, yeah.
Fairly optimistic person, but the reporter in me is a little bit cynical because I just don't buy it.
And I'll tell you, so is the American public. The American public isn't buying it anymore, and you're having to go to extraordinary lengths these days to prove to people that you really are sincere. And that's the number one criteria, I think, for an effective apology. We were talking about how people don't read Aristotle. They might not exactly read Aristotle, but they sure know exactly what Aristotle told you to do, and it's really simple. Admit you made a mistake, take full responsibility for it, and promise you'll never ever do it again. Because that is the formula that works. That is what everyone is doing right now, so we are extremely jaded. We know. We knew exactly that Michael Richards was going to appear on the Jesse Jackson show. We just knew that was going to happen, and when it did...
because these days it's not so much that you hide. I think there was a while when people would keep a low profile, but now I think the theory is you get them out there, everywhere you can, and they're apologizing and meeting with people. I hate to say it like I say, because I believe the principle, but they're having all these meetings and conferences with all the groups and stuff, and I don't know, part of me just thinks, well, if you felt that way yesterday, you probably wouldn't be having the meeting today. You know,
and that's exactly how it's coming across. I think that one of the sad things again about apologies is that it really doesn't matter if the person is sincere or not, because the formula is so canned.
Right.
There are a couple exceptions to that. Politicians, Arnold Schwarzenegger, for example, in his 2006 State of the State address, actually gave what I thought is an apology that every single politician should watch, and he just said, "Message received," to the people of California. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. It was simple. There's a certain amount of groveling that the American public requires out of people that have screwed up, but he did it in a dignified way. And that's one way of handling it that's not formulaic. He didn't say, "Oh, I now have to go to counseling to find out how to be more sympathetic to the needs of California voters."
Right, yeah, exactly.
So he just, he said it. For all that, for everyone that goes into rehab, there's also a side of the American public that really loves a show of strength. One example, to go back about 10 years, when George Bush was running for the governor of Texas against Ann Richards, both of them had suffered from alcoholism, and both of them had sought treatment. Ann Richards had done the traditional rehab route. George Bush just quit cold turkey. And quitting cold turkey really appealed to that sort of macho, stoic strain that is in most of the United States, and especially in Texas.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to make clear, I'm not knocking rehab. I mean, for people who have problems, I mean, that's a serious matter, and I'm not trying to make light or trivialize that.
Of course not.
But I think in a way, though, that these people are trivializing it by just saying, "Oh, I'm going to run off to rehab, or go check into rehab, and then I'll be out tomorrow." You know, where you don't think that they're really there to get help, that it's more, well, here's the thing. I know that, it's a fact, and we're going to have an attorney on it a bit talking about this, or to get his take on it, but I think it's almost in the law these days, that like the judges and juries and courts, if you go into rehab, there are lesser consequences and things.
Yes.
So it becomes more of a strategic move than a real move to try to get help or change yourself as a person. It's more covering your ass.
And then you have people like Britney Spears who go into rehab and then leave the next day and go back in and leave the next day and go back in and leave the next day.
Right.
I think she's now, she might have stuck to it, but I think she's now in her 4th try at rehab. And after a while, we sense that she's not really committed to that at all. But there's also different types of rehab. Rehabilitation for drug and alcohol abuse has clinically proven to be effective. But rehab for being a racist?
Right. Oh, something like that.
That's something that I think the American public, just like you, is a little skeptical of. We're not quite sure that you can cure someone of being a racist, or you can cure someone. Well, we certainly know that therapy won't cure you of homosexuality, and that's what Ted Haggart claimed. He claimed that he was going to cure his homosexuality and his crystal meth use, by the way, at the same time.
I don't even know. Yeah. All I could say is if there are people who really believe that, I mean, I think the old saying, they say you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl. And whether you can take the racism or the homosexuality out of somebody overnight, and whether, anyway, I just think the whole concept is laughable. And on that note, we'll go to a commercial. We'll be right back. And we are back with Leandra Tomescu today, talking about some of the instant apologies and whether they're for real or not. Joining me now is my entertainment attorney, Michael Wallach. I call him the Shark. Great to have you here today, Michael.
Thank you. Good to see you.
I want to get your legal opinion on this, what you think as an attorney, and you're a manager, you have your celebrity clients and all that,
right,
and what kind of advice you'd give them. But first, though, I want to say, you mentioned something earlier that I thought was interesting, that when you say, kind of like Aristotle talking about what a real apology is, I think maybe an apology, this is a terrible comparison, but an apology maybe is almost like pornography, that you know it when you hear it. Maybe you can't define it, but you know. And I do think that you hear real apologies. And one that touched me the most, not so much a celebrity one, every time there is a terrorist act or a serial killer, the parents, or a suicide bomber, the parents always say, "My so-and-so would never do that," or the neighbor, "Oh, he was such a nice little boy." One of the most heartfelt, sincere apologies from the father, I think even of the kid who killed the people in the shopping mall in Utah, genuine apology, apologizing to people, not denying that his son did it, but taking responsibility, saying what a terrible, awful thing it was. And you could just tell that it had, how greatly it had touched him as a person and their family. And I respected that so much, and I thought, wow, I finally heard the family say the right thing. Because instead of it's, you know, my son isn't the shoe bomber. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't kill those people, you know, despite however many videotapes and all the evidence. But to actually hear them, you know, and realize how much it just destroyed their life
I
too.
think that's a great point, because I think if a celebrity could apologize in the way that somebody's parent could, how real it would be for the audience, how much they believe, as opposed to, I'm sorry and I'm going to rehab.
Right.
That's going to take care of the situation, and of course it'll never happen again because I'm going to go to rehab for a week and a half.
Until the next time they have a drink is what I'm thinking, you know.
That heartfelt, a humble apology, or the meaningful apology, is something I don't hear from celebrities. So either they didn't mean it, they don't mean the apology, or they don't know how to apologize.
Right, one of the two.
To get their career back on track.
It's almost like one of those the corporate apologies you get sometime that say, if you were inconvenienced by the 12-hour delay in your flight, we're sorry.
Yes, but,
you know?
but I do want to stand up for David Neeleman, who is the CEO of JetBlue, and you were talking about how rare it is to hear a sincere apology.
Yeah.
It is so rare that I do a weekly podcast, and I actually devoted a whole podcast to David Neeleman because he was sincere. When you saw that video message, you saw the dark circles under his eyes, you saw the tremulous nature of his voice, he was searching for words. This was a sincere guy who literally was absolutely mortified that this happened, and I think that's one of the reasons why JetBlue is going to survive this.
They'll come out of
I agree with you. I remember I was touched by how hurt he was that his company that had such great reputation, that he really cared for his passengers.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, not only in price, but in what they had. He was touched. I mean, he was hurt. He was upset.
And it came
And you
across.
knew that.
Yeah.
And so as a result, you can feel better about his airline, about his
Absolutely.
product.
So I like what you're saying. I agree with it. But I'm wondering, though, is the attorney in you, would you tell your clients the same thing? Because I think back to even car accidents. I think they changed the law here in California, but it used to be almost in the law, you couldn't apologize for a car accident because it was admitting blame. So people are like, whatever you do, don't apologize, you know, it wasn't me, you know. If something happened, then I'm sorry, but, you know, it wasn't me. But I think they actually changed it so now you can give an apology. At least somewhere, I think in California, they've changed it so you can apologize and it doesn't admit guilt. But is that part of it? People are scared to apologize because they'll sue your airline
Well, I think if one apologizes, you're saying you're sorry for doing something, you're sorry for committing a negligent act, you're in trouble. So no, I don't think that's the proper apology. I don't think any lawyer would say,
okay,
basically, admit that you were wrong. If you admit that you're wrong, it's over.
and you'll get more goodwill in the end from
It's
that
over.
than
I
from
mean,
trying to.
for one to do it in an accident, that might be different than if, say, a celebrity does it for another reason. If a Michael Richards says he's sorry for the words he used, or Mel Gibson says he's sorry, for the words he used to the cop, which to me is another thing. I don't mean to get off the subject, but my thought when Richards and Gibson said their things, I didn't know if either of them really hated the people they talked about, or when somebody's in a fight with somebody else and you're really angry, I think you tend to say something that is mean and malicious, even if you don't mean it.
Go for the low blow, or even
because you just find something. You find something about a Jewish person, an Italian person, or whatever it is that'll get somebody.
And there's always
okay?
something.
So
mean,
I don't
you can get 'em on.
necessarily believe that either of those two celebrities meant it. I don't know if they did or they didn't.
Well, I also think, there's degrees of racism, there's degrees of, you have somebody who may make the remark when they're drunk. That doesn't mean necessarily they're in the Ku Klux Klan and, out at the rallies and, they're, and whether or not.
Mel Gibson's problem was that even if the American public had wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, he had already established a suspicious reputation for anti-Semitism.
That's true.
So this simply fed into it. It was very difficult to believe that, oh no, he's not an anti-Semite when he had already been accused of it in the past. And Michael Richards, we didn't have that much of a history, but if you saw that video, You know, I mean, he just kept saying it again and again and again. And the same thing with the word macaca, which George Allen used over the summer, which cost him the election. That caused enough of a stir, but when coupled with a reticence about acknowledging his Jewish antecedents, all of that combined to create the impression that this is real. This wasn't just some blurb that you wish you could take back immediately. So the previous history of the person has a lot to do with whether or not the American public accepts their apology / explanation as sincere and accurate.
Yeah, that would indicate whether or not what they said was for real, whether they really meant it or not. You're right. You're absolutely
and whether
right.
you see it happen again. I'm wondering, again, with all these high-profile cases, what will come out? If they really have, if it was enough of a shock, not only the outcry but the reaction, maybe even the cynicism about their response. If it really will change them as people, or if it's just a matter of time before the right person the wrong place at the wrong time when somebody with a cell phone catches them with.
Well, again, with Mel Gibson in Hollywood, grosses are the ultimate redemption, and Apocalypto, I think, did well enough to rehabilitate his reputation. I hate to be cynical about this industry, but it is the truth.
In this town, if you're making money, they'll do business with you with just about
regardless of what you say. Like grosses redeem in this town. Michael Richards, toast.
What do you think of that, Michael?
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. In fact, after the Passion of the Christ, how many movies and television shows imitated that movie to some degree, or religious-based movies came out? So even though it was a no-no in Hollywood, but they were making those things because that sold and that made money. There's no question about that,
But there is also a legal aspect to this as well, though, right? For actors, I think, was it Robert Downey Jr. or some of them that you can get fired. I mean, if you don't show up on the set, or you're drunk, or get in a fight or something. In general, in every entertainment contract I've ever seen, there's a morals clause. But the question is, how far do they take the body of the clause? I mean, what do they have to do to actually get fired? What it really comes down to is, if the ratings are low on a show, and they want to use it as an excuse to save some money or even cancel the show. And if you cancel the lead performer, you could almost call it a force majeure. It's almost like an act of God. The guy fell into an alcoholic disease. We can't have him, so we can get rid of him, and therefore we get rid of the whole show. But isn't there something, though, that if you go into rehab, though, that kind of saves your butt, that you can say, well, I got help, and so...
It's all factual. It's all whether or not the producer believes that it'll really help. And it really comes down to, as you were saying, it's about money. If they think rehab and a little suspension of the show will cause that actor to come back and be healthy and fit, to let the person go to rehab. But otherwise, it's dollars and cents.
Well, thank you very much, Michael.
Oh, you're welcome.
We'll be right back.
Welcome.
Joining me now is Patrick Smith. He's worked in rehab centers in Sydney, Australia, and you're an addiction counselor as well. Very happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Greg.
So I'm just curious, based on your experience in rehab centers and working with people who, I know you also have worked with celebrities with more spiritual or psychic types of things as well. What do you see in the rehab centers? I mean, do you believe any of this? I mean, when you hear these instant apologies and they're sorry and they'll never do it again and they're in rehab tomorrow, and is that the end of it? Is it that easy? You just go in and it's gone? And
for some people, it can be, but it's not the case for everybody. As there's the intent behind the apology, and if the intent is honourable and genuine, and they are remorseful, they see their plight, then there can be a transformation.
And do you think that in some of these high-profile cases, I mean, are there examples where you think you do see real intent, and others where you don't see so much, or?
I do feel that, probably with Mel Gibson and people like Michael Downey Jr. and those people glean something from the experience. and see that their behavior has not just affected them but others in their environment. And as a result of that, they see the need to change. But until the person sees the need to change, nothing's necessarily going to happen.
So how do you work with somebody like that? Mel Gibson or the star of the week, that, you know, whoever it is tomorrow that we pick up the paper and read about, comes in. What do you do?
Well, they're another sick person, and they need to be treated as such, and who they are in there has no relevance to who they are outside of a treatment
So
center.
the celebrity status isn't supposed to get in the way?
No,
Okay.
because there are no stars, there are only star makers. And the public make the stars, and the public demonize them.
Right.
So
Demonize very quickly.
they need to find it within themselves that there is a need to change, and that's what needs to be addressed, and to address the person, not the image.
And so how would you work against specifically, let's say someone has a tendency to go around using the N-word. I mean, what do you sit down and say to them, you know, to knock some sense into them?
Well, you know, that's
Maybe that's what you should
an
do. just
interesting
knock some sense
question.
into them, you know, that's,
You know, but
I'm old
it's
school,
what
you know,
what
so.
what you know what lies behind that. And there may be an anger problem. Maybe they need to attend an anger management class in order to be able to control or subdue impulses that gets them into trouble.
Well, and I think that that's an excellent point you raised there, that actually, okay, so what you're seeing is that there's something underneath that. If somebody's using the N-word all the time or calling people this and that, I mean, they often say that the biggest gay bashers, and I think what we got in some of these cases, are some of the most repressed homosexuals probably in the end when you really look at it, or have some serious issue with their, you know, sexuality. So they have some issues that you've got to...
Yeah, there's always an
and-
underlying issue, and for every addiction, it's unique to the person, and there's no one common cause other than pain.
You know, but the other thing that you hear, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that you hear so much these days when people make the apologies is the abused childhood. And again, I'm not, child abuse is a terrible thing, I'm not trying to minimize that. I know that it happens, it's awful for the people. But how often, you know, the priest who, oh, well, you know what, I abused him, but somebody abused me. What do you think of that? I mean, do you just pass the buck to, you know, the other generation, or?
Well, there's a saying that says, you know, the sins of the father shall fall on the sons. And so what's not resolved gets passed on to our children. And so it can be a valid point that they don't know any different. And, but somebody, it has to stop with somebody, and somebody has to take
responsibility.
responsibility. But to them, it's a natural and a normal thing.
But I almost felt sorry for Mark Foley, for example, the congressman who was accused of sending inappropriate instant messages to the pages. And he came out with it, and then all of a sudden he revealed that he had been molested by a priest in his youth.
Right.
I have no idea if that was true or not, but it just came across as being so insincere. He really was just trying to pass the blame off of someone. And again, you've got to take full responsibility for it, or the public isn't going to buy it.
Take responsibility. Thank you both very much,
Thank
Leandra. I
you.
appreciate it. Patrick
Thank you,
Smith.
Greg.
Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.